KSC. Presence. Somalia's coast was plagued by pirates for years. Then a sushi chef devised a cunning scheme. They weren't the swashbucklers from children's books. Somali pirates attacked transport and fishing ships, held crews hostage and then demanded ransoms to let them go. Thousands of miles away, though, a sushi chef in Japan heard about the problem and came up with a solution so cunning and unexpected that it could actually work. At the start of the 1980s, the Somali fishing industry showed potential. Indeed, the country's Ministry of Fisheries and AMP, Coastal Development Agency, embarked on a plan to develop fishing businesses. In addition, overseas investors saw potential in the country's untouched waters, which were ripe with marine life. Although the Somali government focused on its own people's small-scale fishing operations, it also gave out licensing deals and signed joint venture deals with other countries including Italy and Iraq. But just as the industry started taking off, Somalia fell into an internal crisis, with much of the country descending into chaos. Without a functioning government in place, the Somali Navy had no guidance. As a result, it fell apart as well, much like the country's leadership had done. As such, the nation's pristine waters went unprotected, and fishing operations from other countries began to cross Somalia's maritime borders illegally. To make matters worse, some even emptied their waste into Somali waters. After watching their nation's resources become depleted and their waters dirtied, local fishermen were no longer content to sit idly by. Instead, Somalis joined together to safeguard their seas, eventually relying on weapons to keep unwanted ships away. From there, however, some stepped into piracy. They would seize foreign vessels, for instance, and then demand ransom money. At first, the Somali pirates exclusively went after fishing boats. But they eventually diversified their efforts to include cargo vessels too. They operated in both the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea, staking out ships to hijack. The pirates attacked hundreds of boats, although not every offensive resulted in a hijacking and ransom situation. One of the most famous assaults made by Somali pirates occurred in April of 2009. At the start of the month, the Maersk Alabama made its way from Oman to Kenya, with around 20,000 tons of cargo and more than 20 people on board. However, a quartet of pirates had their eyes on the vessel. The day before their encounter with the pirates, the Maersk Alabama crew had in fact gone through an anti-piracy drill. They practiced first aid and the use of firearms, for example, among other required skills. But on April 8, 2009, 4 pirates all aged in their late teens made their way on board the cargo ship. The Maersk Alabama's crew nonetheless had enough time to shut down the ship's engine controls and the rest of its systems, which meant that the pirates couldn't redirect the vessel. The raiders subsequently held Captain Richard Phillips and others hostage, but they were never able to restore the ship's functions. Eventually, the pirates took drastic action, taking Captain Phillips with them. They sailed away from the Maersk Alabama on one of its lifeboats. Apparently, they hoped that other pirates would arrive to help with the ship's capture, but that assistance never materialized. Instead, they faced a standoff with the United States Navy that left 3 of the 4 raiders dead. The story not only grabbed headlines, but it was also adapted into a 2013 movie called Captain Phillips, starring Tom Hanks in the titular role. Of course, not every pirating story ended in the same way that the Maersk Alabama's had. Some pirates killed hostages, for example. And Forbes later reported that the pirates' activities had earned them in the region of $150 million during 2009 and 2010. Eventually, the world came together in an attempt to improve the situation in Somalia. The United Nations adopted a slew of policies to protect ships traveling through the area. In fact, these included various countries' and organizations' naval ships patrolling the waters to stave off any pirate activity. Vessels from NATO, the United States, Russia, the EU and China all helped in these efforts. At the same time, a man thousands of miles away took it upon himself to try and help too. Kiyoshi Kimura had always had plenty of ideas. As a teenager, for instance, he envisioned himself becoming a pilot in the Japan Air Self-Defense Force. But after suffering an accident, he couldn't see well enough to continue flying. Kimura didn't stop working hard after that tough break, though. Instead, he picked up a job selling encyclopedias in order to pay for his education. Then, he started a different business. He began picking up small fish that were destined for the trash heap and then sliced them up before reselling the fish to sushi joints. That experience would lead Kimura toward a new career, one that he had begun to envision for himself after his dreams of being a pilot had ended. He wanted to open a 24-hour sushi joint, so he earned his stripes. Kimura subsequently trained as a sushi chef and, at the age of 59, he set up his own restaurant, named Sushi in 2011. Nowadays, Sushi has in excess of 300 outlets, and the chain has seen its annual income reach 100 billion yen. Moreover, Kimura has earned himself the nickname of Tuna King throughout his homeland. In January of 2019, Kimura more than lived up to his Tuna King moniker when he made a record-breaking purchase at the famous Tuosu fish market in Tokyo. The head of Sushi bought a 612-pound bluefin tuna for a price of more than $3 million. He later told CNN, "It is a good tuna. But I think I paid too much." Even though Kimura has made a name for himself buying extra pricey tuna, he still makes sure his offerings at Sushi come at an affordable price. Indeed, according to Sushi.com, he does so even if he incurs deficits because he wants common people to enjoy high-quality tuna without spending too much. And Kimura does his part to give back to the community too. For example, he handed out 1,300 sushi plates to recent graduates whose lives had been disturbed by the massive earthquake that afflicted Japan in 2011. Kimura personally went to the disaster area as well and offered further assistance to the survivors. With philanthropy already part of his life, then, it's perhaps unsurprising that Kimura found himself helping out with a cause thousands of miles from his home in Japan. He came across the issue as he sourced fish for his restaurant chain, and he found that no fishing operations would dare to venture close to Somalia. This, of course, had to do with Somalia's notorious reputation for piracy. But Kimura also knew that the country's waters had a healthy supply of fish, especially yellowfin tuna. The Sushi CEO subsequently decided to investigate the problem for himself. Yahoo! News has estimated that he began visiting Somalia sometime in 2012. Fortunately for Kimura, he had plenty of connections, so he was able to set up a face-to-face meeting with the Somali pirate community. He wanted to learn why the country had no fishing industry, in spite of its many resources. And he found out some surprising things about the pirates' lives. According to the Grape Japan website, the Tuna King learned that the Somalis didn't do piracy because they wanted to. Instead, desperation in the midst of a civil war led them to a life of crime. Many had lost their homes and sources of employment during the conflict, in fact, which left them having to provide for their families by any means necessary. After hearing this, Kimura came up with an idea. He reportedly advised the pirates to start using the Somali seas to their advantage in a new way. Rather than hijacking foreign ships, he thought the pirates could return to their fishing routes and start catching the tuna that lived in their waters. It was a great idea, but Kimura did more than just suggest a reboot for the Somali fishing industry. He also gave the former pirates the tools they needed to make the attempt a success. The Sushi CEO funded the training they required to fish for tuna, helped them to sign up to important trade organizations and purchased specialized ships for them to use. On top of that, Kimura bolstered the industry with his money. Because he helped Somalian fishermen to gain admission to the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, they could start exporting the fish they caught. And, with his preferred type of fish on offer, the Tuna King began to buy from the Somali fishermen to stock his sushi restaurants. Obviously, all of this required Kimura to make a huge investment in the Somali fishing community, purchasing the equipment and the licensing they needed. But, according to the Hong Kong Economic Journal, he felt confident that the money would come back to him in a big way. For one thing, Kimura would continue to purchase the yellowfin tuna caught in Somalia. But he also believed that the fish from Africa would afford him a unique selling proposition for his sushi. He could tell his customers that they were eating fish landed by a team of ex-pirates. Only time would tell if Kimura's plan to fight piracy by boosting their fishing exports would work. For reference, in the years leading up to the Tuna King's initial visit to Somalia, 2009 to 2011, the country's waters had witnessed more than 200 pirate incidents. Yahoo! News estimated that Kimura made his first trip to Somalia in 2012, which set the ball rolling on the ship purchases, training and licensing that he bankrolled. And from that year until 2015, the number of pirate-related incidents started to fall, until it finally hit zero. It's important to remember that other factors were at play besides Kimura's fishing project, however. For example, the United Nations had set up their patrols with NATO and other nations' naval ships. And the threat of a response from a military vessel or aircraft was reportedly often enough to scare the pirates into dispersing, rather than hijacking any traveling boats. To that end, many of the civilian ships that had to pass by Somalia started to come through under the protection of these patrol boats. They formed coalitions with the troops, in fact, which meant they often traveled with protective escorts. Clearly, this practice helped to cut down on the number of pirating incidents too. So, it's impossible to credit all of the changes in Somalia to Kimura's fishing plan. The added security provided by naval ships undoubtedly helped as well. But the Tuna King did nonetheless earn plenty of accolades for his hard work. The government of Djibouti even decorated Kimura with a medal in 2013 in recognition of his anti-piracy efforts, for example. In addition, Kimura did something that other organizations didn't. He listened to the pirates' concerns and came up with a way to help them in a mutually beneficial manner. This isn't a typical approach for business owners, who tend to avoid countries disrupted by war until stability has returned. Since then, things have remained relatively quiet on the pirating front. However, in March of 2017, an oil tanker traveling from Djibouti to the Somali capital had some unwanted visitors. Pirates reportedly took over the vessel but then left without their demanded ransom when they found out the crew was Somalian. And just a week later, pirates struck again. This time, they targeted a fishing boat, successfully commandeered it and ditched the ship's Yemeni crew on dry land. The Somali pirates then chose to hold on to the ship they'd stolen, presumably because it would allow them to attempt to hijack larger vessels down the line. In October of 2018, yet another incident saw a quartet of pirates try to infiltrate the MV-KSL Sydney as it traveled close to Mogadishu, the capital of Somalia. The pirates fired onto the bulk carrier, but security personnel on board launched a counter-offensive, and they successfully avoided a hijacking. The EU's naval force subsequently found the vessel belonging to those pirates and destroyed it. But the failed attempt was still a sign that pirating has continued in Somalia. In addition, it likely encouraged the United Nations to make its next move. In November 2018, the UN prolonged its security activities in Somali waters. Of course, the Somali pirates have another option in the form of Kimura's fishing operation. His program to create jobs and boost the country's fishing industry had shown a new way that businesses can provide locals with a chance to rebuild their lives. The Somali government has also come up with ways to protect the nation's fishing resources. In December of 2018, it outsourced some of its fishing licenses to China. This step was taken in the hope that it will further strengthen Somalia's legal fishing industry, providing more hope for the troubled African country's future. Thank you for watching. And don't forget to subscribe.